And I tell them, well, I said, well, I can't close the loop, as you put it, because my customers don't bring back their poo.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
You might start something here. Compost. I thought it's time we answered some of your questions you put to me. First things first then. These are my 2 compost bins. So let me just catch you up if you haven't followed me along on this journey before. When we first moved to this garden, my very first compost bin was actually a big wooden pallet bay that was right at the back of the garden. The standard pallet bay that you see a lot of people have. I realised over a few years that it was a bit bigger than the amount of waste I was producing, but also only having one bay meant it was quite difficult to get that compost turned or to access the compost that was ready, which is at the bottom and inside the pile, when there was only one space and it was all covered in all the new fresh compost. These are something that I seen when I was having a bit of a composting search on the internet, and they're called hot bin composters. Now that's the brand name of them, but it's essentially just a big compost bin. It's made out of the same material that your car bumper is made out of. And the reason for that, the company claim, is it helps to keep the heat in when you're hot composting, to help that process along. I believe with these bins, it helps so much if you've got a knowledge of composting before you jump in and start using any gadgets. Because that way, when things don't go to plan, which will happen, you know why and you know how to fix it. So let me tell you then about all the things that haven't gone to plan with these bins for me and my way of working with them to make it all work. Now the first thing, it's a selling point of these bins, is the fact that it's a nice sealed contained unit. But the downside of it being this contained closed up thing is it doesn't lose moisture. And it's why I've had to really think through the process and how I do things. But what I find is, because it holds it all in like that, the compost tends to be a bit wetter than I would like. It's wetter than I'd like for just handling and doing things with. Now, it's fine for adding this mulch to all of my beds, and we're going to get into that in a second. I also have an issue as well that they may be all sealed, but this box at the top isn't weather sealed, and I found that these actually do let in the rain. And living in Scotland, that's quite a problem. So I'm going to have to come up with a system to cover them over. And it's one of the questions you guys keep asking me as well. So let's talk about that. The advertisers for these hot bin composters are quite specific in their instructions. They tell you the amount of greens and browns to add, and they tell you to leave it there and let it do its thing. And it should be hot, it should be 60°C. Theoretically, that is exactly right. But I've found that depending on what you're adding, you have to adjust the amounts of the greens and the browns that you're adding. So think of it like this. We're not going to go into a big heavy science video today, that's not the point of this. But your greens, the greens are the things like your garden waste, your grass clippings, all that kind of thing. For us even, coffee grounds. Those are the things that make the composting process hot. There's a lot of nitrogen in your greens, and that, when it's decomposing, is what helps to make that heat. There is also an awful lot of moisture in greens. So we combat this process by adding the browns. Now the browns are your kind of woody or dead materials. Think of it that way. It's a bit simplistic, but it'll help us with this process. They help because they tend to be a bit chunkier, so it helps to keep airflow in your bin. Oxygen's a good thing. The little bacteria making your compost need the oxygen. It helps because those browns help to soak up some of that moisture, and those browns, the carbon, help to take up any of the weird smells that are happening while it's composting. Now this is a big thing. Your compost, when it is running properly, shouldn't smell bad. However, sometimes if you don't get things right, it will. And that is generally a sign that you have too much green in there, because it makes things wet and sludgy and heavy. So that's the first question I always get asked about: why is my compost so wet, and why does it smell, and why is it cold, why is it not hot? Now, chances are you're adding too much green, so you need to up the levels of brown. But this is a system that works for me in my small garden. I'm in an urban environment, I've got neighbours on either side. They maybe don't feel comfortable with me having big open compost bays. There's all that thing about what if I don't get it right, and the smell. This contains it for me, but also its size and appearance. This is my garden. It's not a farm where I'm growing food. It's not an allotment away out in the middle of nowhere. This is our garden that we sit in and spend time in. So these are small, nice small footprints, and they're quite attractive for my garden. And this was one of the key things I wanted to ask Charles, because Charles Dowding is famous not only as the godfather of no-dig, but because of his composting. He does a lot of composting, and he has a fantastic system. But I wondered, what if he had a garden like mine? What if this was his situation? Would he still do things the same way? So here we are then with the godfather of no-dig, Charles Dowding, and you're about to do your lecture tonight on compost, and he's just going to give us a wee 10 minutes before he starts to answer some of your questions. Are you ready for this?
Ready? Yeah, well,
Okay.
I think I am, yeah.
Here we
Far
go.
away then.
You've got a beautiful market garden, lots
you.
of space, and I confess, I'm envious of your compost bays. They are a thing of beauty.
Yeah, so, well, for me that's important, because not that everyone has to have such a beautiful space, but it just makes it more attractive, and wanting to be involved with making compost. And you know, I grew up where it was compost bays were always shoved down the bottom of the garden and hidden almost, and it was the last thing on your mind to be adding anything to a heap, you know, for the reason of making great compost. It was more somewhere to lose the waste. So I'm trying to turn it into something more.
Yeah, but on that note then,
central.
I'm going to ask about the bottom of the garden thing.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'm urban, very, very different sort of scenario from you.
Different.
We've got neighbours on both sides, it's quite a small garden.
Mm-hmm.
If you were in that situation then, how would you compost? Would you still have huge big compost bays?
No, yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because you need to tailor it to your space, and from what I've seen of your place, I think, you know, one of the 220 litre conical plastic bins would be brilliant, because they're self-contained. They don't actually take up much space, because space is at a premium, isn't it? And it's just the round footprint. A round shape is a very efficient use of a space, and no corners or anything like that. And they would hold enough, I'm sure, of what you would generate.
Yeah, in an urban garden anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would recommend, even so, that you also scrounge. I don't know if you do that, but you know, like coffee shops and anything else to increase the volume of what you are putting in there, because that will make it nice to compost. Basically, it doesn't really work. Composting, well, it kind of works, but it goes so slowly if you just add dribbles of stuff, particularly in the winter, actually. Although in the winter, maybe, you know, you could say it's a time to slacken off a bit, but particularly spring and autumn more than summer, keep it moving by bringing in a bit of other waste as well. But if you had room for 220 litre bins, that is one way. Maybe for a bit bigger garden than you have, I don't know. But what you can do with one is, have you ever done it where you lift them off? So, you know, they've got doors at the bottom that basically are not fit for purpose. It's really hard to get stuff out. And what I find that I can do is, because they're very light, you just lift the whole thing up in the air and then put it down next to where you had it, and then you can fork off the top. It sounds like you're familiar with this, and then you've got access to what's on the bottom of your compost.
So it's like your bay system, but you're just using the Dalek bins instead.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah, it's being adaptable, and also matching the size of your bays, if you like, if you want to call it that. So you could call the conical plastic bin a bay, but because it's your only and main. It's much more efficient to have a small bin or bay that's well used, rather than a big one that hardly ever fills up.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to come to that one in a second, because size is a good one. So something it's a group of questions that I get asked quite a lot. I also had someone recently say they'd love to see inside my compost bin. I think that's a bit weird. Why would you want to see in my compost bin? But we'll do that. But questions then. How do I know when the compost's ready to use? And that's a brilliant one. We're going to talk about that. How much compost can you actually make? Which is not as easy to answer as you might think. So we're going to go into those. And I think it's good because I see people quite often are surprised when they see their favourite YouTubers who make homemade compost and have, especially the guys with the big bays, they're quite surprised when they're buying compost, especially around seed starting time. So I think these are all good things to talk about. So let's start with my bin and what's in it, and how do you know when it's ready? So this is my bin at the moment. You can see there's bits of chopped up branches in there. There's lots of chopped up bits of plant. There's bits of paper. There's a bit of a mix of colours and how ready things are. You can see there's bits of grass that's all clumped together. This is my bin. That's not ready. But I want to talk about ready, because what does that mean? When is it ready? Well, it kind of depends what you're using it for. Now, I guarantee a lot of folk, when they talk about compost being ready, this is what they're thinking about, or maybe something even finer than this. It's fluffy, there's a little bit of fibre in there, it's pretty much dry, it's fine, doesn't smell of it anything at all, it's just earth. That's your smell. Is that ready? Yeah. But this isn't what the compost is like when you pull it out of a compost bay. This is what it's like after I've sieved it, because I'm going through the process to try and get this to have as few extra bits and pieces as possible. And it's one of the issues I have. I've often spoken to you guys about not having as much compostable material as I would like, because the garden has a limited capacity to give me that. So I have to quite often be asking neighbours for their garden waste and for them to save paper for me, all of that kind of thing. But even with the waste I have in the garden, one of my main issues is size. So I have to chop it all by hand, which means I end up with these chunky bits of kind of trimmings from shrubs and hedges and things. They take much longer to break down than all the nice fine material you can put in there. Which means, quite often, I'm doing this. I'm sieving the compost that's come out the bin, just to take out any of the big bits that haven't finished yet. And that's the thing. If I'm taking out bits that haven't finished yet, does that mean all of it's not ready? Actually, no. So it comes down to what you're going to use it for. The bigger pieces will take longer to compost down than the smaller pieces. So when you empty your bin, you're going to have a mix of stuff that's good and ready, and then the bigger bits that you can throw back in. But how finely I might want to sieve that and how much I want to take out, it's going to depend on what I'm using it for. Because for the whole, the compost from my bins, my homemade compost, on the whole, is what I spread in all of my beds and containers in the garden. So we sometimes talk about that as being mulch consistency. And what that means is actually it's still got bits and bobs in it. It's still got little bits of wood chippings and things in it. You can see that here, look. It's not all fluffy stuff like you would get in a bag you would buy in the garden centre. It's got lots of little bits in it, and that's fine. Homemade compost is beautiful organic matter. It's full of soil life, of all those microorganisms you want, and that's why we do it. It's not about what it looks like. But yes, the bigger bits I try and take out. Now, if I'm using it for small pots or in the greenhouse, I sieve it even further. but I do that sieving in the greenhouse. So you guys know my system in the greenhouse. I have these big plastic bins, and in these I've got compost, I've got cocoa coir, I've got vermiculite, and I make up all my own mixes in here for seed starting and potting on and that kind of thing. Now, at this point, this is when you really seriously start thinking about sieving. Now the thing is, this is useful not just if you're using homemade compost, even shop-bought compost. There's always going to be bits and pieces in there, bits of fibre, bits of twig, what have you. And it's great to sieve all of that out if you're doing any seed starting and you want it super fine, or if you're doing potting up in the greenhouse, when, let's be honest, these are probably the biggest pots you're going to use. So you want that to be a bit finer to get more of it in the pot, less of those big gappy bits. So that's what I do in here. Now I've got 2 sieves in here, different sizes. The one I use outdoors is a sieve that Kate made me, and it's just chicken wire that's in there. And that just gets out the biggest bits, the chunks. And that leaves me with compost that's perfect for putting on all of my beds as a mulch. This is taking it down a lot finer. And this is a lot finer again. This sieve I think is about 4mm, the size. This is slightly bigger, it's maybe about 6-7mm. But these just take the compost down until it's even finer again. You've probably guessed what I'm going to say now. You don't have to wait till your compost looks like it does in the shops before it's ready to use. Imagine I'm brand new to this, I've never done it before. I've maybe come to one of your lectures and I'm all excited. Composting, I take it out and it doesn't look like the stuff I buy in the shop. How do I know when it's ready? And is it ready to put on a bed? Is it ready just as a mulch? Can I use that for seed starting? How do I know all these things?
Yeah,
you're the expert.
Such a good question, because I totally get that. If you haven't done it before, you wouldn't know. And also, when you buy compost, it always looks so nice. So people judge themselves on that, and oh, my compost, it looks awful, that.
Yeah.
But actually, I'll bet you anything that most people's compost is more full of microbes and goodness in many forms and fashions compared to that stuff that's kind of half dead in a sack.
It's been sitting in a bag for months and months.
Yeah, and even if it hasn't, did it ever have much goodness in it anyway, or much microbial life and that sort of thing. So, that's why I'm always encouraging people to make compost, because I had a guy, I was giving a course in compost making about 18 months ago, and this guy came along and he didn't want to be there. You could tell he was feeling really grumpy old man. And he said, I get everyone to introduce themselves because I want to know what they're up for, and also then everyone can talk to each other a bit. And he said, I have compost making. I've never had any luck with it. I don't even want to do it. It's almost what he said, paraphrasing it. Anyway, after looking around the garden, seeing what I'm doing, and he had a moment of joy, and he realised. He said, I'm making good compost already, and I didn't realise. Yeah. So he prejudged what he's doing. He thought it had to look perfect. So that's really what I want to get across to the viewers is accept bits of wood and everything. I never sieve my compost. So this is for mulching. For mulching purposes on beds, it's actually quite good to have a bit of half decomposed. And I would say before a year is up, aim to use what you've made, even though it won't look perfect. Because after a year, it can actually start to, it doesn't go back on it, but it shrinks in volume.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You get less. And what you're doing when you spread it, you're spreading it maybe 2/3 mature, you could say. Not that there is even an end point, but it's then working on the soil. Because with no-dig especially, it's exposed to air, and that's really important. Microbes need to breathe. And so you've got your composting finishing in situ, if you like.
I find especially over winter.
Yeah,
you put it on there, and then by the end of winter it just looks brilliant.
Yeah.
It's all broken down.
Yeah, because even though our winters are really quite cold, there's still microbial action going on. Yeah. If you want it for potting compost, that's a whole different use.
Ballgame.
Yeah, and that's more difficult, and you do need it more mature. But I would say you also need to sieve it and down to minimum, if you can, 5-6mm, which is quite a small sieve. And you won't get so much. But if you mix that, chances are by then, if you leave compost that long, you will have worms in there, which are not often present at the beginning stage because it could be too hot or just it's too raw and rough. But they come in later, and by that stage the compost is turning into something that's very wonderful for potting mix. And if you put even 10% of that sieved into some grotty compost you buy,
it just
multi-purpose,
elevates it.
yeah, exactly, it lifts it onto the next level.
Yeah.
So,
do you add anything to yours if you're using it for potting mix?
well, I will add multi-purpose compost actually to bulk it up.
Yeah.
Say 50%. I use 50% of mine. I don't actually now. In the past I've added a bit of seaweed meal maybe.
Okay.
I figure that's really good. Maybe a bit of rock dust. Kind of trace elements things. Mm-hmm. Wood ash if you got it.
But in terms of, I said, when it's going hot, I can get mulchable compost in about 3 to 4 months. So that's one of the things that people asked. How much compost can you actually get if you do your own home composting? Now, I'm going to say this up front because this is one of the things that I think shocks a lot of people. I create a good chunk of my own compost. Pretty much whatever's in all the beds and containers, every year I'm giving that a mulch from my bins. So I don't have to have big builder's bags delivered just for that. But I buy compost, especially in spring when I go through a lot of it for doing seed starting and potting up and that kind of thing. I've rarely got enough of my home compost to get me through, so I do buy it. So then I asked Charles, what does he think? How much compost can you make? Now, it's a really hard question, and I'm not sure any one of us can give you an exact answer. I can tell you that one of my compost bins gives me enough to mulch my vegetable beds and one of my flower beds. The containers in the next flower bed has to wait until I've got another lot of compost. Okay, I'll get you this one then, because we mentioned about sizes and this was a great question that came in. So now it's about estimates. Can't give exacts, it's estimates. Your average 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot compost bay. Rough estimate of how much compost you reckon you could produce each time round.
Each time you go from start to finish?
Start to finish.
Okay, well, first of all, I was just slightly query on, you said the average 3 by 3. Why 3 and not, I would say a bit more than that?
Well, 3 by 3 by 3 is the one that you always see getting recommended on TV shows and things.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I don't watch TV, so. Because I would say pallet size for me would be, they're getting into different areas here, but 1.1 metre square, which is about 3 foot 8, I think. For me, is the ideal. But if I'll take your 3 by 3 as an example, it's not quite a metre, is it? So you're not going to get a cubic metric, a metre cube.
Well, we're going small gardens here.
Yeah,
so,
okay, fair enough. And then because compost keeps shrinking, you're going to get, a third of a tonne probably, if you are lucky. It's difficult talking cubic tonnes and cubic.
And then trying to think of it in terms of meters. How many beds and
Yeah, okay. I'm going to sound a bit vague here because the other thing is it depends how full you get it. Yeah, because that's the other thing you need to judge. You don't want to carry on dribbling forever into the same bin unless you're going to do the conical plastic bin. You're going to lift it off and then blah blah blah. But in a normal bay where you maybe want to fill it, and then stop filling and fill another one.
Yep.
So. I reckon if you can fill one of those within 3 months in the summer, say that's a good thing to aim for, and that might involve bringing in some waste from elsewhere. But it wants to be going up and up, and then it goes down a bit, and then going up and down a bit, and you go through that phase, don't you? And you think, this is nearly ready. Now it's gone down a bit more. and then so it's got to the top, and then it's not sinking so fast as it did. And at that point, I'll just put a piece of polythene or cardboard on top and kind of seal it off, and then no one else can put anything on it, and then you start on the next one. But basically, I would say a bay like that, whether or not you turn it's going to shrink by at least 50%, isn't it? So I should have done an estimate before answering this question, actually. I'm not too sure how much
it's okay.
it will cover. But I would always say to anybody, you're not going to get as much as you might hope. So, you've got to get a decent amount of compost, you've got to work at it, haven't you?
You do. But the thing is, making your own compost, just making a little bit, is a great thing. Spread it around the garden.
It's still
you don't
really
have to be
worthwhile.
self-sufficient in compost.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. I mean, people say to me, you should be self-sufficient. I don't understand why they think I should be. Like, I'm running a market garden. I'm selling 3 tons of vegetables a year, so I'm selling a lot to customers. And I tell them, well, I said, well, I can't close the loop as you put it because my customers don't bring back their poo.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
You might start something here. Okay.
But that's another one. I don't know if you got a question about it, but I'd encourage anyone, if you've got a big enough space actually, just have a 6x8 shed in the garden and you can turn it into a compost toilet.
Okay, folks, you've heard it here first. This might be a season of videos he's doing next year.
But you do obviously need a big enough garden and not too close to your neighbours.
And maybe be vegetarian.
Yeah.
Okay, the very last one. Okay, I'm going to make you pick your brains now. Tell us about a compost fail you've had then, because everyone has failures. We all start somewhere and we have to learn.
No, I've had a few. I mean, that is how you learn. You're so right. But that's why in my teaching and videos and everything, I'm looking to share what I've learned from that. And one of the big ones is keeping the rain off. So before I had a...
Try living in Scotland.
Roof, before I had a roof on my heaps, which is only since 2016 I've had a nice roof. Before that I was covering with plastic, but even then you get water seeping down the sides. And water's the big enemy of aerated compost because it just makes it soggy and smelly and swamp-like. And since having the roof, wow, what a difference. And I would say most of it is now successful. There's obviously other things that can be refined, but I would say that's the big one. Keep the rain out of your heap as best you can. And you can, the conical bins are good because they have a lid. So that works. If you go a slightly bigger operation and have the pallet bays, I would invest in some corrugated iron. So that can keep the rain off. Even 2 small sheets side by side will cover most of this. Bit of stone on top to weight it down. That's my main one. What else have we got? Probably the other one would be putting in too much wood and in too big pieces because wood takes a long time to decompose.
Yes, it does, yeah.
So I actually now sieve my wood and I've realised, that's a job worth doing. I never sieve the compost because if you make sure your ingredients are not too big, especially the woody ones, then you're going to get a reasonable compost.
Oh, I dream for that day.
What? Which day?
When I don't have to sieve.
Oh.
We're chopping everything by hand.
Okay, right.
One day.
Yeah, well, aims and ambitions and dreams are all good.
Yeah, we've got aims and ambitions, we've got slight failures that we've learned from, and some great advice. Yeah. So thank you so much.
That's a pleasure.
And we better let you get up and get your lecture going now.
Yeah, there's a big crowd coming.
I know. And I'll see you guys back in the garden. If you want to go and learn more about composting, he's got a book out and you can go and grab that and have a wee read of that. So thank you so much, Charles, for having a wee chat with us, and I'll see you guys next time. See you, folks.